Okay, so this video takes a look at what we did in the context of Daniel Perek Aleph, the first chapter of Daniel. The purpose of studying this chapter in Daniel was to get a taste of what Jewish life was like in exile. So this first section of Daniel Perek Aleph tells us about how Nebuchadnezzar took captives from Jerusalem. If we look inside, we didn't get into the nuances of this date, the third year of Yehoiakim. There's a big controversy surrounding this date. But we do know, because we discussed it before, is that the king, when the temple was destroyed, the king when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, was named Tzidkiyahu. Yehoiakim is a brother of Tzidkiyahu who had ruled earlier. We had discussed this earlier in the year, that after Yoshiyahu died, his son Yehoahaz was king very briefly, just a few months. Then Yehoiakim was king for several years. After Yehoiakim died, his son Yehoiachin was king again very briefly, and then Tzidkiyahu was the king for several years. So, if we're talking about the reign of Yehoiakim here, who was the third person in this family tree to be king, it means we're still several years before the temple is going to be destroyed. Yeah, and some questions about the calculations, but we're over a decade before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. So when Daniel is taken captive here, he's not taken captive because the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. On the contrary, this would show that Daniel is part of the upper class that we discussed before, that Babylonia, Bavel, under Nebuchadnezzar started exiling the upper class before they destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. And so we're told here that Nebuchadnezzar had taken Miktzat Klei Beit Elokim. Miktzat means like a little bit of, just a drop. He took a few vessels from the Beit HaMikdash captive along with the upper class. And this leads us into the story of Daniel. So again, Daniel is in exile. The Beit HaMikdash has not yet been destroyed, but Daniel and his friends are in exile. And in class we discussed possible titles for this section. We would presumably title it something like the king takes children captive from Yehuda, or how the king treats these children, these Jewish children, in his palace. You can pick your exact title based on what we're going to see here. We're told that the king told Ashpenaz, who some Rav Sarisav, sort of his head eunuch, some high-up person in the palace, he told this guy Ashpenaz to bring him some children from Bnei Israel who were very talented kids. They had no no blemish. They looked good, tovei mareh. They were wise, maskilim b'chol chochmah. And these wise kids would come before the king, and they would serve. In order to serve the king, Ashpenaz would have to teach them l'lamdam sefer u'lashon kastim. And the key part for our purposes here is the lashon kastim part. He would teach them the language of the kastim. Kastim in English Chaldeans is another way of saying Babylonians. So Daniel and his friends are going to be, these kids, these talented, attractive, wise kids are going to be taught the language of the Babylonians, which is going to be very important if they're going to serve in the king's palace. And the king further says that these kids should be given every day, dvar yom biyomo, every day, day by day, mi patbag hamelech, the royal food, umiyin mishtav, and wine of his part, so royal food and wine. They're going to be raised this way for 3 years, and eventually some of them are going to stand before the king. So the purpose here is clearly to raise these kids with a good royal treatment, right? Nice royal food. They're going to eat in the king's cafeteria, so to speak, and they're going to learn the king's language. And in order to drive this home, the king takes among these kids 3 kids named Daniel and his 3 friends, Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and he gives them Aramaic names, Babylonian names. So Daniel is now called Belshazzar. That doesn't sound like Hebrew. Hananiah is now called Shadrach. Mishael is now called Meshach. And Azariah is now called Abednego. And so what I asked you to look for here is different ways in which the king tries to send a message that these people are going to be assimilated into Babylonian culture. And we found 3 things. The issue of language, the Shon Kastim. The issue of food, they're going to eat the royal food. And lastly, the fact that he's going to give them all new names. That the Sarisim, this officer Ashpenaz, gives them all new names that are not Hebrew. And so in all these three ways, the kids are basically being given a message that from now on, you're not primarily Jews, you primarily are here to serve King Nebuchadnezzar. The next segment consists of Daniel's response to this. So again, you give it some title like how Daniel conducted himself, or how Daniel coped with his situation. And Daniel tells himself, Asher lo yitka'al, he will not defile himself with this royal food and wine. And so he says to this officer, look, I'm not eating this stuff the king gave me. And it never uses the word miracle here, but the Navi seems to imply that Hashem supports Daniel, because we're told, Vayitain ha'elokim et Daniel chesed u'rachim mifnei hasarisim. God gives Daniel chesed and rachamim before this officer. So without using the word miracle, the Navi tells us, God made Daniel come across as likable enough that this officer has mercy on him and lets Daniel, and he doesn't just say, I'm going to kill you for disobeying the king. Instead he says, look, I want you to eat this food. Ki yarei ani et Adoni HaMelech. I fear the king, right? I'm concerned. The king gave you this food and this drink so that you'll grow up healthy. So I'm concerned if you kids look worse, less healthy than all the other kids your age, you're gonna you're gonna obligate my head to the king. You'll make me chayav. If you learn Gemara, the Gemara often uses the word chayav, which literally means obligated, but it means like liable. If you do X, Y, and Z thing on Shabbat, you're chayav mita. You're liable for the death penalty. If you do some other sin, you're chayav malkot. You're liable to get lashes. You're going to make me liable to the king, right? When the king sees that the kids that I'm in charge of from Yehuda don't look healthy, he's not going to realize it's because you didn't want to eat his food. He's going to think I didn't take good care of you, and the king is going to punish me. And so Daniel tells the Meltzar. Meltzar in modern Hebrew means a waiter from the story, because it's the guy giving them food. Although many scholars today think it doesn't literally mean waiter in this story, it just means whoever was in charge of food here. Daniel tells this guy who's in charge of the food, listen, give us a chance. And this phrase I bolded, this is the key phrase here. What's Daniel's plan? Nas nat avadecha yamim asara. Test us out. Nas like a nisayon, a test. Test us out for 10 days. Vitnu lanu min hazeroim. Give us zeroim from the word zera, seeds. Give us, legumes, vegetables. Ever think of this scenario where you're at a restaurant or a dinner somewhere where you're not sure if everything's kosher? So what do you say? I'll just have the salad, please, right? They have to be careful the salad doesn't have onions that were cut with a chafed knife. So you say, I'll have a salad, no onions, please, and no dressings that might be chafed. Give me a plain salad. I just want, a few pieces of tomato, a few pieces of pepper. So Daniel does that exact thing here, right? Daniel is the source for that idea. He says, give me some seeds, some plants. All I want is a salad. Let us eat that. And we'll drink water, right? He doesn't explain anything about keeping kosher. He just says, that's what I want, right? I want a special diet where I eat salad and, I don't have any alcoholic beverages. I only drink water. And Daniel said, let's see what's going to happen for our appearance, our mar'eh, versus the appearance of the other kids who do eat the royal food. And based on how we look, you can decide if my plan is working or not. So he said, okay, I'll give you kids 10 days. Test them for 10 days. And after these 10 days, what happens? Nir amarehem tov uvriye basar min kol hayeladim ochlim et patpag hamelech. It turns out, after 10 days, they look just as healthy or even healthier than the kids who were eating the royal food. And so based on that, he allows them to continue with their routine. And what do you know? These kids succeed. Natan lahem elokim madav haskel b'chol sefer v'chokhmah. The king also makes them wise, because Hashem makes them wise, because the king's whole goal was he wanted these kids to develop so they could have responsible government jobs serving the king. And so Hashem blesses them with that wisdom, and Daniel in particular is very wise. Daniel hevin b'chol chazon v'chalamat. Daniel understands how to interpret visions and dreams. And so, again, without using the word miracle, I asked you, how do we see that God supports them? So the Navi doesn't use the word miracle here, but there are a couple of steps that initially God makes Daniel be likable enough over here. Daniel is likable enough that this officer is willing to let him try this plan of only eating the salad. And then at the end, after the 10 days pass, God sees to it that in fact these kids are healthy, even though they're not getting as much protein as everyone else. The other kids are eating lots of meat, presumably, which is going to have protein. These kids are only eating the salad, and yet they look healthy. So again, the Navi does not use the word miracle, but the implication is that was miraculous. And lastly, God sees to it that they come across as especially wise and intelligent, Daniel in particular. And so basically the king's not going to be angry at them. He's going to be fine with them if they have all the abilities he wanted them to get, despite not eating his food. And so the Sar Sarisim, this officer, brings the kids before the Nebuchadnezzar, and the king speaks to all the various kids in this group. None of them are as good as these four, Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and therefore they stand before the king. And whenever the king needs some advice or some wisdom, he needs to talk to his advisors, he finds them. He finds that Daniel and his friends are 10 times as wise, 10 times as good as the Chartumim and Ashrafim, the various sorcerers that the king had in Bavel. And so at the end of the day, Daniel's plan works out that he does not give in. He does not eat the non-kosher food, the royal food, and nevertheless, the king is very impressed with him. So we mentioned here a couple of questions, right? One thing that seems kind of obvious, why do you think the officer gives Babylonian names to the Jewish boys? That clearly seems to be sending a message that now you're in Babylonia, now you have to assimilate into our culture. And why do you think Daniel refused to eat the king's food? The simplest explanation would be that the food was not kosher, right? What we tried to show over here is that perhaps we could interpret it differently. We read a line here from the Ralbag, where the Ralbag tells us, let me move this out of the way so you can see it a little better. Okay, Ralbag tells us over here, Ralbag is Levi ben Gershom. That's what it stands for, Rabbi Levi ben Gershom. He lived in Spain in the 1300s, and he says, according to this interpretation, which is very correct, that word yitga'al the Navi used. It said they didn't want the food asher lo yitga'al. Daniel will not defile himself with the food. What does it mean to not defile himself? That's a very strong word. That sounds like more than just saying he didn't think the food was kosher. It's not just that he's going to violate a certain halacha by eating the food. It's that on a deep level, it's going to defile him, make him disgusting or despicable. So what's so disgusting about this food? I mean, it was tasty food, I'm sure. So Ralbag says, Yitka'al me'inyan tinuf v'lichluch. It's a language of, tinuf means to be disgusting, lichluch, dirty. Haratzon ba, what did he intend by that? Shlo yavize al Yisrael hitka'al Daniel was thinking bigger than just this one shaila in the laws of kashrut. He wasn't just saying, I don't want this food because it might not be kosher. He was saying, I don't want to make Yisrael, Am Yisrael, defile ourselves with their, dayot sounds like knowledge, but it means something more like customs, the social norms and the minhagim, the customs of the Bavliim. Once we start down this path of, it's okay to eat their food, he could have justified it. Maybe he could have said, look, I have no choice. I'm scared the king's going to hurt me. My life is on the line. But Daniel knew if he goes down this path, takes this first step of eating the royal food, it's going to be a reason ultimately lihitchaten b'hem, to marry into them, to assimilate. Once just go down that path of, okay, I could marry someone in Bavel. That could lead us then to their actions, their faith. And so Ralbag is saying, and we tried to bring this point through in class also, the real issue here with not defiling himself with the food is not just the food might not be kosher, but he doesn't want to give in to the whole culture of Babylonia. Food, part of why we care so much about what we eat as Jews, it's so important to keep kosher, is that it's a marker of whether you're a part of our community or you're assimilating into the general society. And so we pointed out in this way, even though Daniel is different than us because he was coerced by the king, it's somewhat similar to our experience today where we try to have a Hebrew name and eat kosher food as markers of our identity.